אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא.
Hello and welcome again to the weekly Torah perspective on Parshas Mishpatim. The last Seder was the Seder of Matan Torah Yisrael, and the coming Seder is the Seder of Teruma after Mishpatim. And I'd like to go into why the weekly readings of the Parshas of the Torah is arranged in such a way that Mishpatim comes between Yisrael and Teruma. But I want to start with saying over a couple of things in the name of Reb Zalman Sorotzkin. Reb Zalman Sorotzkin may be known to you from the big street through the Haredi neighborhoods of Yerushalayim, which is called Rehov Sorotzkin. He is a very interesting man. He was the son-in-law of the Telzer Rosh Hashiva, Reb Lezer Gordon, who is actually buried in London, in Edmonton Cemetery. He passed away during a visit to London. He had a heart attack, and the weather in London was not conducive to his health, and he tragically passed away. And his levaya in 1910 was one of the largest levayas ever seen in London. In those days, 50,000 people were there at his levaya. Of course, London in those days had a lot of recent immigrants from the area that Rav Sorotzkin came from. He came from the Lithuanian area, where the Telzer Yeshiva is. In any case, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin asked the following. He says, "Ve'ele hamishpatim," these are the laws, or these are the judgments. And the Seder last week ended with, after the Aseret HaDibros, after the Ten Commandments and the revelation of Har Sinai, it ended with a couple of psukim that speak about how you build the Mizbeach. Mizbach Adomo Ta'aseli, one pasuk says, and the next pasuk says, Ve'im Mizbach Avonim, and if you build a stone altar. So there are certain dinim, certain regulations that apply when you build an altar. It can be made out of earth, like a kind of a mini hill, or it can be built up out of stones. And he says, in the next week's Seder, we read, V'yikchu li truma, you shall give offerings for building the Mishkan, for building the tabernacle. Zahov, V'chesef, and the Choshes, gold and silver and copper. And Rav Sorotzkin asked, V'lama hifsik be'emtzer binyan beis Hashem b'mishpatim? Why does the Torah interrupt the flow of the narrative, speaking about an altar, and then in Parshas Teruma continuing with all the requirements for building the Mishkan? Why does it interrupt it with an entire parsha which is devoted to justice, to social laws, to how to treat each other, how to settle disputes with each other, laws of damages, and all the paraphernalia that belong to organizing your society? He says, "Mipnei she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu sone gezel ba'olah," because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates theft with sacrifices. He explains, Lefichach, achrei shezochar mizbeach shel adomo va'avonim, and therefore, after the Torah mentions an altar built from either earth or from stones, hamitzuyim lo'odom b'chol mokam ve'ein lohem kimat erech v'shivui, things, earth and stones, that are readily available for everybody and have hardly any intrinsic value or are even regarded as much. Terem shetzivo al trumas zahav v'chesef, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs us about contributing gold and silver, he's here as Bnei Yisrael. He warns the Bnei Yisrael, ala Mishpatim, regarding laws and civil law, about loans, about property, about damages. Shekol echot ve'echot yidaktek b'kaspo u'v'zahova, that everybody should be very, very careful with his silver and his gold. Im ksherim heimo, that they are kosher, that they are conforming with the laws of the Torah. Im ksherim heimo al pi din haTorah. V'rak oz yitein mehem lebinyan beis Hashem. And only then he can use that money, those possessions, to build a Mishkan for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's, of course, a well-known phenomenon that some people amass fortunes in less than kosher ways and then become great benefactors for humanitarian causes, and by that they think they can kosher their money. Says Rav Sorotsky, you kosher your money by doing honest business. You kosher your money by scrupulously adhering to the requirements that are asked from you in your monetary affairs. Rav Sorotsky continues with telling us a little bit about why Mishpatim is right here. He says on the word ve'ele, and these are the laws, starts with the letter vav, and he quotes Rashi. Rashi says, Kol mokam shenema ve'ele, everywhere where it says ve'ele, and these, mosif al rishonim, it is a continuation of something that was said already before. You can't say and these when it doesn't come to add on to something that you knew already. And these are also the laws. These are a continuation of what I said before. Where is this said before? Haine she'al miktsas dinim nitztavo b'moro. Because even before Matan Torah, at the end of Beshalach, we were already instructed regarding certain laws, certain dinim. It's difficult to really translate the word dinim correctly here. It's not just laws, it's not just regulations, it's the whole complex of organization of our societal arrangements and the way we live together and the way we treat each other. All those are called dinim. Dinim. Shenema, as it says there in the pasuk at the end of Beshalach, Shom som la'chok u'mishpat. There he gave them statutes and mishpat and justice. Kedrashas Chazal, the sages explain this in Gemara Sanhedrin, in Nun Vav, says Va'atu bo lahosif aleim es hashar. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and says, I gave you a little bit of instructions over there, but now I continue and I go to great lengths and I give you an entire civil code. I think you can call Parshas Mishpatim the Jewish civil code. And says Rav Sorotsky, you can see here that not only is the building of the Mishkan preceded by Mishpatim after the huge revelation on Har Sinai, but conversely also the revelation of Har Sinai is sandwiched between the Mishpatim in Morah at the end of Beshalach and the Mishpatim in this week's Sedre in Parshas Mishpatim. So you see, one cannot be seen separated from the other. The two are intertwined. Spirituality, so to say, things that have to do with your relationship with God, have to be sandwiched between the things that regulate your relationship with your fellow man. But likewise, your relationship with your fellow man should be sandwiched between your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Parshas Yisrael, where he gave us his great revelation of Ma'amad HaSinai, and Parshas Truma, where he instructs us to build for him a dwelling place among us. Let's look for a moment at this passage in the end of Beshalach, where it speaks about Shom, Somlau, Chauk, or Mishpat. The pasuk before that, actually at the beginning of this pasuk, says, Vayitzak el Hashem, and Moshe Rabbeinu, after the Jews said, we cannot have anything to drink, and the water here is bitter, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped Moshe Rabbeinu after Moshe Rabbeinu cried out to him, Vayitzak el Hashem, Vayarehu Hashem eitz. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him a tree, and you could read eitz is related to the word eitzah. It's a piece of advice. Just practical. How do you make the water drinkable? You throw this tree in the water, Vayashleich el hamayim, and he threw this tree in the water, Vayimteku hamoyim, and the water became drinking water. Shom somlau chauk u'mishpat v'shom nisahu. There, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him, which is ambiguous. It could mean Moshe Rabbeinu, but it really refers to the Jewish people. There, God gave us a statute, and there he tested us, nisahu. He subjected us to a test. How do we deal with adverse circumstances? You could easily have imagined that at that time, people who had taken with themselves some water, maybe they had canteens with water, and other people didn't have it. There was a national emergency, they didn't have water. What do? You try to find a solution together. You don't resort to taking the water from someone else. You share your resources. I think it's not too much to read into this pasuk that in circumstances where the going gets tough, it is all the more important that you adhere to standards of how to treat each other and how to live together. And then it is followed by the following pasuk. Vayomer, I'm still talking about Beshalach. Vayomer im shomoa tishma lekol Hashem elokecho. If you shomoa tishma, I find it always so difficult to translate this Hebrew idiom of the repeated verb. It's actually untranslatable into other languages. Vayomer im shomoa tishma lekol Hashem elokecho. If you will listen. If you will certainly or assuredly listen, or if you will diligently listen to the voice of Hashem your God, and you do the right thing in his eyes, by lending your ear to his mitzvahs, to his commandments, and you follow his statutes, that even the things that you do not understand. Chauk refers to the things that you do not understand, whereas Mishpat refers to the things that you do understand. All the illnesses that I brought upon Egypt, I will not bring upon you. Ki ani Hashem rafecho. I am Hashem, your healer. You could possibly read that all the injustices that you suffered in Mitzrayim, not just all the plagues that I put on Mitzrayim, but all the sickness of the society that you come from, you will be able to avoid. I will not put that on you, Ki ani Hashem rafecho, because I, Hashem, am your healer. That is to say, the way I tell you to live will be an antidote, will be a protection against the illnesses that society can suffer from. This is Rav Sorotskin. He has another very interesting observation. He says, Ve'ela ha-mishpatim asher tosim lifneihem. These are the laws, says Hashem to Moshe, which you will put before them. And he says, this is not unknown, Chazal explain it like that, lifneihem means in a Jewish bestin, in a Jewish court of law, do not go to the courts of law of the nations among whom you live. And this is actually halacha. If you have a dispute with another Jew, your first port of call is a bestin. Therefore, it is extremely, extremely important that we appoint in our communities dayanim, rabbonim, people who guide us, but also people who decide questions for us, who are upright people, morally upright people, free from blame, and not just people who do a job, but people who dedicate their life to this tzedek, to this righteousness. As it says in Parsha Shoftim, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, you should pursue justice. So for the health of our life, it is absolutely, not only for the health of our life, but the life of our communal life, it's absolutely essential that our dayonim are beyond reproach. But Rav Sorotsky says, look at the situation that the Jews found themselves when they left Mitzrayim. They were people without an internal organization, without even the semblance of statehood. Not like, for example, the situation was in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, at the end of the British Mandate. The Jewish community in Palestine had a fully functioning government in waiting in the form of the Jewish Agency and various other Jewish communal organizations. They had already lived during the British Mandate with people who were trained, people who were judges, people who could be appointed mayors of cities. Not so when we left Mitzrayim. When we left Mitzrayim, we were a bunch of slaves. We did not have any of this talent already homegrown, with the exception of two people. There was Moshe Rabbeinu, who has had a very good education at the Egyptian court, who was trained in statecraft, and we have even midrashim who fill in the blanks of the 65 years of Moshe Rabbeinu's life after he fled from Egypt and before he returned, 55 years I think it is, that Moshe Rabbeinu during that time functioned as a national leader, kind of a king in Kush, in the country south of Egypt. These are very obscure midrashim, very puzzling midrashim, but one can understand that Moshe Rabbeinu was equipped with certain talents that came simply from his excellent education at the Egyptian court. And there was one other person who had a similar type of background, and it was Yisro. Yisro, his father-in-law, who was Kohen Midian. Kohen means not just priest, it means a minister, somebody who serves the nation. And that is, he is also called a Kohen. For example, about David HaMelech's sons, it says that they were Kohanim. Well, they were certainly not Kohanim like some among us are, who go up in shul to the Duchen to pronounce the Birkas Kohanim. It's not that type of Kohen. No, Kohen means, lechahen means to minister, to serve. And it's not for nothing that even in our language, to minister and to administer are from the same root. They are the same thing, that is lechahen. So Yisro was a Kohen Midian. He had a certain training as a national leader, and he, together with Moshe Rabbeinu, in Parshas Yisro, before the Torah was given, set up a judicial system and started a training of people who could fulfill this role once the Jewish nation would be a self-governing entity, which of course they became immediately after they escaped Paro and after the giving of the Torah. In the 40 years in the Midbar, they were a functioning, albeit mobile, community or even society. They had an embryonic statehood where Moshe Rabbeinu was the king, and the Zekanim were there, and the Shoftim and the Shotrim, they were all there. Now, You might have thought, says Rav Sorotskin, that we should take a leaf out of the book of Moshe and Yisrael and say, let's turn to the people who had an education in Oxford and Cambridge, or in Egypt, or in Midian, and let's rely on them and go to the kosher courts in the countries where we live, because they had the education. Why would we go to our dayonim? They are just rabbis with beards. What do they know? No, says Rav Sorotskin. We are not to copy the so-called, he calls it the so-called enlightened and free nations with their institutions, because we have our own Jewish institutions, and the duty that rests on us is to keep our Jewish institutions in a state fit for purpose, so that we can implement the dinim of the Torah the way they should be implemented in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I think that may be a way to understand the pasuk in Tehillim that we say every day in Pesukei de Zimra. Magid devorov liYaakov chukov u'mishpatov liYisrael lau osa chen lechol gai u'mishpatim val yedoum haleluka. It's of course from Tehillim Kuf Mem Zayin 147. Magid devorov liYaakov, he communicates his words to Yaakov, to the Jewish people. Chukov u'mishpatov liYisrael, his statutes and his ordinances, or his societal laws, to Israel, to the Jewish nation. Lau osachein lechol gai. He never did that with any other nation, and they do not know Mishpatim. What do you mean they don't know Mishpatim? They don't have, you never signed a contract with a company, and then it says in one of the paragraphs that governing laws shall be the laws of England. Of course, England has Mishpatim, and so does France, and so does the United States, and Russia as well, they tell me. Of course they have Mishpatim, but their Mishpatim are malleable according to the predominant philosophy of the time. You have a different philosophy, they will adjust their laws. As we can see today in our society, where things that were 10 years ago unthinkable now become obligatory by law. I'm not going to go into the whole matter of gender identity, but I think that even the most casual observer with an unbiased mind knows that they have a tendency today to overhaul well-established principles of law just to accommodate to the philosophy of the day. This is not Mishpatim. This is not what the Torah regards as Mishpatim. Of course, a non-Jew is just as much as a Jew obligated to implement in his society Mishpatim. But to tell you the truth, the best Mishpatim that you have in the world are derived from Jewish law. I'm very, very certain of that. So this was a little glimpse into the thoughts of Rav Sorotskin, the Lutzkarov he was called, after the town where he was a rabbi before he came to Eretz Yisrael. He fled Lithuania because he saw the worsening circumstances, and he made his way to Eretz Yisrael and became one of the leaders of the Jewish community or the leader of the Jewish community in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for listening to the weekly Torah Perspective. And if you like these shiurim, if you like this broadcast, maybe you consider subscribing to this channel, and maybe leave a comment if you have an observation to make.
ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארת